Have you ever noticed how food has the power to tell stories? Not just about the ingredients or who prepared the dish, but about something much bigger, who we are and what we believe. Now imagine the following scenario: a large table set under the sky, filled with dishes from different cultures, the smell of spices in the air, the sound of mixed voices, laughter, and deep conversations. In each dish served, there's a heritage, a memory, an identity. But here's a question that may seem simple but carries a profound meaning. What does food really represent to you? For some, it's just a biological necessity. For others, a momentary pleasure. But what if I told you that food can be a universal language, a tool capable of uniting or dividing entire peoples? Throughout history, food has not only defined civilizations, but has also shaped beliefs, conflicts, and reconciliations. Think about how many times in the Bible, the Quran, or the Torah, food appears as a central element. From sacrifices in the temple to the Last Supper, from the dietary restrictions of Jews and Muslims to Christian dietary freedom. Eating has never been just eating. There has always been a greater meaning. And in today's world, where everything changes so fast and we are increasingly connected, or at least we think we are, food remains one of the last ties that keeps us close to our roots, but at the same time, it also separates. Just look at any multicultural city and you'll see how different groups organize themselves around their foods. Indian, Arabic, Italian, vegan, kosher, halal restaurants. Each dish tells a story of belonging. But what if I told you that food can be more than an identity? Let's talk about culinary diplomacy. You may never have heard this term before, but it is transforming the way countries, cultures, and communities interact. Culinary diplomacy is a concept that uses food as a bridge to unite nations and overcome differences. It sounds simple, but it has a profound impact. Want an example? During the Cold War, when tension between the United States and the Soviet Union was at its peak, one of the first initiatives to bring the two countries closer together happened. Not on a battlefield, but at a formal dinner. Carefully selected dishes, special wines, and conversations that at first seemed superficial, but gradually opened space for political dialogues. Today, this practice remains strong. Governments promote diplomatic dinners to create ties. Non-profit organizations use community kitchens to integrate refugees into new societies. Renowned chefs travel the world, sharing recipes as a way to create connections between different peoples. And you? Have you ever stopped to think that by sharing a meal with someone, you are creating a bridge between stories, experiences, and cultures? Now, look at our time. A world marked by polarization, conflicts, and divisions. A world where people seem to have less and less patience to listen to each other. But what happens when two people who disagree sit at the table and share a meal? Food forces us to slow down, to listen, to respect. And more than that, it reminds us that despite all our differences, we are all human. Now think about your own life. How many of your most memorable memories are linked to food? That family recipe that is passed down from generation to generation. That special dinner that brought together people who hadn't seen each other in years. That taste that transports you to a specific moment in your history. This happens because eating has never been just about nutrition. It has always been about connection. And here's a challenge for you. The next time you sit at the table, stop for a moment and look at what is in front of you. Ask yourself, what story does this dish tell? Who came before me so that this food could be here? What traditions, what cultures, what hands touched each ingredient? Because when we understand the depth of food, we begin to see the world in a different way. And this is just the first part of our journey. In the next few minutes, we will dive even deeper into this relationship between food, culture, and identity. We will understand why some traditions embrace certain foods while others avoid them. We will explore how religious and spiritual diets are shaping the global economy. If this has already stirred you, stay with me, because what comes next could change the way you see not only what's on your plate, but how you connect with the world. Have you ever stopped to think about how something as simple as food can define who we are? You may never have realized, but what we choose to eat or not eat is not just a matter of taste. It has to do with history, belief, and even how we perceive the world. Now imagine yourself walking through a street market in an old city. The smell of spices in the air, the sound of vendors calling customers, stalls filled with fruits, meats, and grains. You pick up a food, and someone next to you refuses it, not because they don't like it, but because it represents something deeper. That's where we enter the universe of food prohibitions and permissions. Why do some religious traditions prohibit certain foods while others consider them sacred? Were these choices only spiritual, or was there something more? In Judaism, for example, kosher rules have existed for thousands of years and are not just about what can or cannot be consumed. They establish how a food should be treated, prepared, and served. This not only strengthens Jewish identity, but also creates a dietary discipline that connects with spirituality. In Islam, halal meat follows similar principles. It is not enough that the meat is allowed. The slaughter must be done respectfully, mentioning the name of God. Eating for a Muslim is not just nutrition, it's an act of devotion. But what about Christianity? Why don't Christians follow such strict dietary restrictions? The answer lies in the transformation that happened with the teachings of Jesus and his apostles. When Peter had his vision in the book of Acts, he understood that purity did not come from food, but from the heart. What was previously a separation between peoples became an inclusion, allowing Christianity to expand beyond Jewish borders. Now you may be wondering, what about science in all this? Here's the most interesting thing. Many of these prohibitions had a basis that went beyond faith. Think of pork, avoided by both Jews and Muslims. For millennia, it was not known what science proves today. Pork can be a host for parasites such as trichinosis. In ancient times, without refrigeration or safe cooking methods, this prohibition was not only spiritual, it was a protection of public health. And today, do these traditions still make sense? What we see is fascinating. Ancient dietary laws remain alive, but now for reasons that go beyond what was imagined. Many choose to follow kosher or halal diets, not only for religious reasons, but because they believe they are healthier, more ethical, and sustainable foods. And what about new food trends? With the increasing concern for well-being and sustainability, we see a growth of diets based on values: vegetarianism, veganism, slow food. Are we recreating in a new way the same rules that existed thousands of years ago? Food continues to be a reflection of who we are. Now let's dive even deeper to understand how these choices impact not only faith, but the global economy. If this has already made you think differently about what's on your plate, then stay with me. What comes next could completely change your view on the impact of food in the modern world. Are you enjoying the video? Leave your opinion in the comments, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. Now that we understand how food reflects beliefs and identities, I want to take you to another level of this conversation. Because beyond faith, there is something that directly shapes what we eat. The global market. And here's a question for you. Have you ever wondered why so many giant brands like Nestlé, McDonald's, and Coca-Cola invest heavily in halal and kosher certification? If religion and economics seem like different worlds, the truth is that they are more connected than you imagine. The market for faith-based foods has become a multi-billion-dollar empire. To give you an idea, the halal sector is projected to exceed $2 trillion by 2027, growing faster than any other segment of the food industry. The kosher market, although smaller, also moves billions annually, reaching an audience that goes far beyond Jewish communities. But why is this happening? Because increasingly, these certifications are not just about religion. They represent quality, food safety, and for many consumers, a seal of reliability. Many people who do not follow any specific faith opt for halal and kosher products because they believe that they go through more rigorous inspection and control processes. And the big brands have understood this. Companies around the world adapt to meet these requirements and expand their consumer base. But don't think that this growth happens without challenges. With globalization, a new problem has arisen: how to ensure that a food really follows the rules of faith on an industrial scale. The kosher certification process, for example, requires rabbinical supervision throughout the production chain. If a factory wants to sell kosher foods, it needs to ensure that there is no contamination with prohibited ingredients. The same goes for halal. Producers must follow specific slaughter and processing standards, which require rigorous audits. This means that religion is not only influencing what people eat, but also how the industry operates. Now think about this. If religious food has this gigantic economic power, what other influences can it exert? Responsible consumption is a clear example. In Islam, in addition to halal, there is the concept of tayyib, which means pure and healthy. Increasingly, Muslims demand that their foods be not only permitted by faith, but also ethical, sustainable, and free from cruelty. This is driving a change in how products are manufactured and marketed. And in Judaism, something similar happens. The kosher vegan movement is growing, bringing to food laws the concern for the environment and animal welfare. Now stop for a second and think about the impact of this. Millions of people around the world, by following their food traditions, are redefining how foods are produced, creating demands for the industry to be more ethical and transparent. And this leads us to an important reflection. Are we moving towards a world where spiritual and religious values will guide the future of food? Because you see, today many people are abandoning traditional diets to follow regimes based on ethics and health, veganism, organics, local food. These new habits have more in common with the ancient religious traditions than they seem. What was previously considered outdated is now becoming a trend. And this shows us one thing: faith and food have never stopped being connected. What you eat not only impacts your health, it impacts the economy, culture, sustainability, and above all, the values we choose to follow. Now tell me, when you buy a food, do you think about the story behind it? Have you ever wondered who defines what gets to your plate? In the next few minutes, we will explore this question even further, because what comes next could completely change how you see the future of food. If this has already made you reflect, stay with me. The next step in this journey may be even more revealing. Have you ever imagined what the food of the future will be like? Forget for a moment the traditional dishes, the ingredients you find in the supermarket, or the meals that your family has been preparing for generations. The world is changing, and the way we eat is changing with it. But here's the question that may seem strange at first. What will religion say about this food revolution? Because you see, we are entering an era where meat no longer comes from animals, but from laboratories, where foods are 3D printed, where proteins are synthesized without ever having existed in nature. Now think, if a food has no past, can it still have a spiritual meaning? This is one of the biggest debates that religious traditions face today. Because the dietary rules of many faiths were written in a world where technology did not even exist. But now we need answers to completely new questions. I'll give you an example. Have you ever heard of lab-grown meat? This technology allows scientists to create real meat, cell by cell, without needing to slaughter any animals. It sounds like science fiction, but it's already happening. And the question that arises is, can this meat be considered kosher, halal? Rabbis and Islamic scholars around the world are debating this question. If the meat did not come from an animal slaughtered according to sacred rituals, can it be consumed? And if it is created from a cell of an animal that was originally allowed by religion? Another example, cow-free milk. With the advancement of biotechnology, scientists can already produce milk without needing cattle. They synthesize proteins such as casein and lactoglobulin, creating a product identical to milk but without the animal. Now, think of the Jewish tradition. If this milk never came from a living being, can it still be considered a product derived from meat, or is it completely neutral? These questions are not just philosophical, they have a direct impact on how billions of people will eat in the coming years. And it doesn't stop there. Today, there are already startups developing fish without the ocean, eggs without chickens, honey without bees. Each of these innovations raises deep theological questions. If food has a spiritual value, where does that spirituality fit in when food is manufactured? And now I want you to think about something bigger. Faith has always been linked to the earth, to nature, to cultivation, and to tradition. But what happens when food becomes completely independent of these factors? Are we moving away from our roots, or are we finding a new meaning for what we eat? Now look, some traditions are already embracing this change. Religious leaders around the world are re-evaluating their dietary laws to ensure that spirituality remains a part of this new reality. In Singapore, for example, cultivated halal meat has already received consumption certification. In Europe, Orthodox rabbis are analyzing how the Torah can adapt to food technology. And here's something that might surprise you. Some of these changes are already reaching you. If you consume plant-based products, use supplements developed with artificial intelligence, or eat genetically modified foods, you are already participating in this revolution, whether you realize it or not. The question now is no longer, when will this happen? But how will we deal with it? And here's the point. The spirituality of food will not disappear. It will transform. The big question that remains is, are we prepared to redefine what it means to eat with purpose? Now let's explore how this change is not just about technology, but also about politics, culture, and the future of food identity. If up to this point this video has already made you rethink what you know about food, stay with me. What comes next may be even more surprising. And here we are. After this whole journey exploring food as identity, faith, economy, and technology, we arrive at an essential question. What does all this mean to us? Because in the end, food has never been just about nutrition. It has always been about who we are, how we connect, and what we choose to value. Think about all the conversations we've had so far. We've seen how food traditions have shaped cultures for millennia, how what we eat reflects our values and beliefs, how large industries have been transformed by the power of faith, how technology is challenging what we understand as food. But there is something bigger here. Whether you are religious or not, your food choices say something about you. They show what you respect, what you avoid, what you value. And that's the big question. Are we really aware of these choices? We live in a world where every meal we make has an impact. A simple breakfast may involve grains grown by small farmers on another continent. A quick snack can carry centuries of tradition in its recipe. A decision to exclude or include an ingredient may be connected to political, environmental, or spiritual movements. But in the rush of everyday life, how often do we stop to think about this? Now I invite you to do an exercise. The next time you sit down to eat, look at your plate, not just as food, but as a story. Ask yourself, where did this come from? Who touched these ingredients before they reached me? What does this dish represent beyond its flavor? Because when we begin to see food in this way, we realize something powerful. The act of eating is never isolated. It always connects us to something bigger. And this connection can be used to separate or to unite. Throughout history, food differences have been a reason for division between peoples, but they have also been a meeting point between cultures, interfaith dinners where Christians, Jews, and Muslims share their traditions at the table. Sustainable movements that unite communities in search of a more ethical food. New generations that reinvent old recipes to preserve their cultural heritage. All of this shows us that, in the end, food is one of the few things we all have in common. It can be used to distance us, creating barriers between us and them. Or it can be used to build bridges, bringing together different people, ideas, and beliefs. And the decision of which path to follow is in our hands. Now I want to hear from you. What marked you the most on this journey? Is there any food tradition that is part of your life and that you had never stopped to reflect on its meaning? Leave your comment below. Let's continue this conversation. And if this video made you see food in a different way, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave your like, because there is still much more for us to explore together. Thank you very much for joining me. Until here, I hope to see you in the next video. Until then,